Thanks, Nick, for that introduction. A little shorter than you. All right, so thank you guys for being here today. This is the session before lunch, so thanks. My name is Angela, and I'll be talking a little bit about our collaborative and cooperative efforts to manage and monitor post-fire water quality in a large Northern California lake. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors here, particularly Sarah Ryan with Big Valley Rancheria EPA, Richard Knoll from Water Boards, Greg Dills with the Lake County Resource Conservation District, and Amy Little of the Drinking Water Division in Water Boards. So in 2014 at the Joint Science Aquatic meeting in Portland, there was a session looking at the effects of fire on freshwater ecosystems, and the conclusion from that session and the subsequent paper by Bixby and Cooper was that few data is available on the fire effects of lakes, ponds, and wetlands. And that makes it difficult for managers like us that manage a lake that has had many impacts of fire, many fires in the last 5 years. For this talk, we're going to focus mostly on the Mendocino complex, which is outlined here in red. And it was two-component fire, the ranch fire and the river fire. And it burned over 450,000 acres. And our county is relatively poor, we're a disadvantaged community, and we've had lots of fires, and so a lot of the response to these fire impacts overlap the current fires that we have. So we're still managing impacts from the Valley Fire that happened 3 years ago, and then we get this other large fire last summer. And Clear Lake is an important resource for the county, both ecologically and economically. So it's California's largest freshwater lake that's located entirely in the state. It's very shallow and it's very old. It's almost 500,000 years old. So this means that it's very hyper-eutrophic. We have a lot of productivity, a lot of algae, we have cyanobacteria issues, and we also have a nutrient TMDL because it is on the impaired water body list since 2006. But it does have provide a lot of ecosystem services. So there's several tribes that live on the lake and still use the lake for cultural use and consumption. It is a popular fishing destination. So we have people that visit all over North America. It's been rated the third best bass fishing lake in North America and the first in the western US. It serves drinking water for over 40,000 residents. And the water from Clear Lake flows through Cache Creek and serves the Central Valley agriculture. So things to understand about the nutrient TMDL, even though it's for nutrients, it's a mechanism by which we manage sediment. So cyanobacteria blooms are caused by phosphorus inputs, and we can manage phosphorus by managing our sediments. So in Lake County, phosphorus is heavy in the sediments, and we have this graph here that shows the strong relationship. We have solids on the X and our phosphorus on the Y, and this is one of our major tributaries in Middle Creek. And you can see in the satellite data, so this satellite imagery at the top is from the winter time, and so you can see a sediment plume after a big storm event, and then the image on the top right, that's the phycocyanin, that's the pigment that's found in cyanobacteria. So you can see similar areas, so where that sediment's coming in, we're seeing those cyanobacteria blooms. So that leads to the question of what is this post-fire impact when it comes to sediments? And it really took a team approach to answer this question, particularly looking at the timeline. So we had the fire in 2018, July, August, and a little bit in September. And we see these rain events starting as early as November, December. So it only gives us a couple months to be able to decide, well, what can we manage, and then how can we monitor those impacts? And of course, we have to consider those long-term effects, but we're still in the short-term period for that. And it really took a village. So this was a big collaborative effort. We're indebted to the Water Board for providing funds for us to be able to both manage and monitor some of our post-fire impact, but it took everybody coming to the table, all the stakeholders, to be able to really identify where can we have the most impact in managing this and where can we monitor this to be able to identify the impact that does occur. And so just really thank all these organizations and the people that came to several meetings very quickly after the fire to be able to talk about this in a constructive way that I think is very beneficial. So the first step was to look at the landscape and identify places that we could put best management practices that would actually have a significant impact on mitigating impacts from the fire. And so this was supported by Rich Mull and his team at the Water Boards. And what you see here is all these dots represent priority areas where these BMPs could be placed that have the most impact, and they have a priority system. So when it's ranked A, that means A is high priority, having the most impact, to about C, which means have less impact, so there's less priority to focus on those areas. And so what we can see is that down here at the Manning Creek and the red circle, those are where we have a lot of those high impact areas for BMP placement. So some examples of some of these BMPs. So the Manning Creek Watershed, well, the RCD, the Resource Conservation District Lake County, went out with some consultants and installed some of these BMPs. So there's a hay bale check dam there. Sometimes a storm comes in and rearranges those check dams, so they have to be reconfigured and maybe reinforced so then they can serve the purpose on the landscape. In some instances, like these lower pictures of the Scotts Creek Watershed, the area was just too vast to put in any of these small BMPs, so we had to do hydro seeding. And so you can see the trucks there just spraying those hydro seed, and that's a mixture of a fast-growing seed with the sticky material that really stays on the landscape and will start that veg growing so it can stabilize and prevent that sediment runoff. Sometimes there's a combination of both. So this picture here on the bottom right has both check dams and some hydro seeding. So some of the results that we had over 4,000 acres, which is about 57 parcels where we had these high priority BMPs placed. And keep in mind, remember our fire was like 450,000 acres, but these acres and parcels were deemed to have the most impact for placement here for protecting the landscape and the fire response. And the gravel bag dams were about 1,000, hydro mulch was about 52.5 acres. Wattles, we had 400 that were placed on the landscape, check dams, 140, and we had about 5 areas that were this combination fabric gravel slope stabilization. So these are some examples of some of our BMPs. So this is from the Middle Creek Watershed. This is our largest tributary. So at maximum amount during the post-fire season, we had about 5,000 CFS coming through this system. This is one of the tributaries that contributes to that, so you can imagine the flow. They come through there, and in some instances, they would just push out these hay bales, just relocate them, and then other instances just complete blowout and just decimate these hay bale check dams. So they have to go in and reinforce those. We had lots of successful installations, and here's an example of one. So the idea here is that these check dams help slow that water movement so the sediment can settle out and stay on the landscape instead of flowing down into the trib and then end up in Clear Lake. Here's an example of a properly installed wattle. And you guys can see the sediment collecting behind that, and then you can see the land between the wattle and the river. It's actually veg is growing back, and so that's going to stabilize that area right there and prevent that sediment and erosion from going into the creek. And then here we have a series of steps on the right, and you can see several of those check dams. You can just see that murky water that's there that those dams are holding back that now can settle. And this is my favorite example. So you can see those trees. So all of that from that hay bale up is just filled with sediment, and all of it's captured there. And then the water that's coming off is nice and clean and clear, and that's what we're seeing coming into the tributaries. And so this is really, these BMPs are really helping, having an impact on them. So the question we get a lot from working for the county is, how will this post-fire runoff impact Clear Lake, right? So the public is seeing images like this on the top, and they're wondering, well, what is that going to do for the water quality and the image on the bottom? And so what we really need to look at is looking at any trends and seeing if there's any shifts pre and post fire. And this makes it really hard because you don't always have a lot of pre-fire data to be able to do that. So for this project, again, funded by the water boards for a lab analysis, for our streams, we had about 9 stream sample sites, but we only had pre-fire data on about 2 of them. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here. And so what we have is Middle Creek, which is that top black dot, and then Kelsey Creek, which is our reference site, which is the outline dot here at the bottom. And we sampled for nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, suspended solids. We also did a full metal suite. And then we also looked at turbidity within 24 hours of every storm event. And that we shared with stakeholders around the lake. In the lake, we worked with the DWR. They have a long-term sampling program in the lake at 3 sites in the 3 arms, indicated by the blue, red, and yellow dot. So the main thing is determining when to sample. And we use the California-Nevada River Forecast Center network. And so what we do is we have several gauges in the county that's collecting real data, and there's predictive data on there. And so this graph here on the right goes 6 days out. So what we're able to do is we're able to see, okay, when are we expecting the peak storm event to occur? And that way we can assemble our team. So as a county, we really don't have a lot of resources, we don't have a lot of staff, we have to rely a lot on partnerships, and it makes it a lot easier to do that when you have the idea of, okay, what day and what time do you guys need to be out to go out to help us sample, right? And usually it's always like 10 o'clock on a Friday night, or 6 a.m. the day that a big grant's due, right? That's always when the big storm events are happening. But this tool is really useful, and it really helped us a lot, and it's incorporated in our methods for the sampling program. So here's a little bit of data from our tributaries. So that top graph, this is our reference site. This is Kelsey Creek, and along the x-axis we're going to have our time. We've been collecting data in the stream since 2014, and so this is for our TSS data, and you guys can see that of the data we collected, post-fire pretty much aligns with those pre-fire sample conditions, compared to our Middle Creek, which was at the base of our burn scar for the ranch fire. And post-fire, we did have some elevated levels of TSS at that site. This is more pronounced, however, with our phosphorus or nutrient data. So again, looking at the reference, which is Kelsey Creek and the red dots, right in line post-fire as in pre-fire. For the post-fire for Middle Creek and the white dots, we can see 4 of our sample events, so 4 of our storms resulted in the highest phosphorus concentrations compared to the pre-fire collection data. But of course, the big question, like I said, the public's always asking, well, what about the lake? We are lucky that we have some longer-term data for the lake from DWR. And what we can see, this is from 2004. This is concentration of phosphorus. And we've had some steady increases in all sections of the lake of phosphorus since this data has been collected. So I don't get half the post-fire data for this, but are we going to see major increases from the post-fire for this? Maybe, but we've already seen some increasing trends over time. Same thing with phosphorus data. This is all arms pooled together. It's just a different way to look at it. And again, we're seeing some increases. The next steps that we're kind of looking at is looking at these jumps in nutrients and kind of see what's going on during those time periods to indicate maybe some other things that are occurring with these nutrients in the lake besides just fire. And of course, because our TMBL, we're always looking at our chlorophyll. This is the way that we measure our TMBL for this lake. And so what this is showing is our chlorophyll data since May 05. And our TMBL is the dotted line, that's a target. Our target is 73 micrograms per liter. And then the line is the Mendocino complex. And so we can see that we've had indicators of chlorophyll increase before our fire. We're just now analyzing this data up until August for this, but there's something else going on here. And for this period particularly is when we had those drought years, and then it was followed by big flood years. And so that's what is probably contributing to some of those increases for chlorophyll during this time period. So a combination of these kind of large climatic events with fire would be interesting for us to be able to look at and see what's going on with our lake. One thing that I would share that was really important, and I'd recommend to other managers that are managing drinking water sources, what we did is we have a storm event, we collect our samples, and then within 24 hours we would analyze our turbidity, and we put that all in email and send it out to all the stakeholders. So anybody that showed any interest in having that data right away within 24 hours of a storm event, we shared it, and this included our water purveyors. So if you look right here at this map, North Lakeport, this is right there where the Middle Creek comes into the lake. So that is a water purveyor area. They serve over about 3,000 residents. And they received some data from our turbidity data after a large storm event. They saw that those NTUs were really high, about 4,000. And they were able to shut off their intake and go to an intertie and their backup. And that meant that they were able to save a lot of money in filters, emergency staff. They were able to keep drinking water going to their residents without any issues. And they really relied on that knowledge of what was coming down the stream in order for them to prevent any additional costs, staff time, and extra effort for those post-fire impacts on those drinking water systems. So this is something we're going to try to keep doing for this post-fire period, 3 to 5 years. And it's something that I'd recommend to anybody else that's managing drinking water that has an impact from fire. We did look at metals. Now metals is hard because we didn't always sample them pre-fire. And so we didn't have any reference data, but what we did look at was the levels that we got and then compared them to baseline or guidance documents such as the Sacramento Basin Plan. We looked at aquatic life criteria, the water quality objectives for the state, and World Health Organization levels. And we did see that we had elevated levels of aluminum, chromium, and iron. And this is pretty standard for results of metals for water quality for post-fire. It's all pretty standard. We're going to continue sampling these if budgets allow for the next 3 to 5 years and hopefully see a decline as we move from that fire time period. So some of the next steps for this project, we do have lake sediment data, and so we have to analyze that. There's a lab on analyzing that. That is something that'll be interesting, is seeing what the impact is on sediment for internal loading purposes. And we also really want to continue communicating, collaborating with researchers and lake managers that are dealing with post-fire impacts. So I will plug that that's what we're doing right now at this meeting of the session, so I'm really excited about this. And then also we're having a special session at the Joint Science Meeting in Aslo SFS in Madison in June in 2020. And so I invite my other session participants to attend that and share that information. And hopefully we can get more information out there for ponds and lakes for post-fire impacts and management. Some lessons learned is that fast collaborative action with all those partners really helped us identify areas where we needed to put management, look at potential resources for funding that, and then also for managing and monitoring the water quality afterwards. Some of the challenges that we found was literally just getting access to the property. So sending out right of entries, access. If that's something that managers can do ahead of time, or get your local councils or boards to just do a blanket right of entry, that would be really helpful. We couldn't get to some properties just because we never heard back from these people, which makes sense, right? Their houses were burned, they don't have their mailbox, maybe they're out of town, they're not coming back, so we never got the access, and there was a lot of potential management that we could have put on the landscape that we didn't have access to. There was applied methods for protecting drinking water. Because we worked with the Drinking Water Division, invited them to our meetings, they were able to tell us, hey, can you send out that turbidity data after you analyze it? And we said yes, and we were able to do that, and we were able to help local citizens keep their drinking water after these large storm events. And we wouldn't have known that if we didn't have this collaborative meetings. And of course, always want to work together. There's going to be next time. And then I would also recommend getting consistent monitoring funds, ASAP, particularly for that pre-data. You know, it's really hard to estimate, well, where is a fire going to be? How can you get that pre-data? But having those monitoring stations in place, even if it's not every year, but maybe every other year, is really important to looking at the actual true impact of these fires. We would say that we had some sites that we couldn't get access to because we had flooding issues. So you want to be safe and you want to use real-time sampling if possible, but understanding that's really expensive. We're trying to look now, trying to figure out how we're going to afford more real-time sampling stations. Working with UC Davis right now to kind of do that as well. And then you want to monitor for these post-fire events at least 3 to 5 years after they occur. That's the recommended amounts, and it's difficult, particularly for a county like ours and other counties that have had multiple fires every single year. You're still dealing with impacts of previous fires, and you get a new one that you have to deal with and manage. And then also keep in mind that water quality monitoring, even if you have drinking water systems, is not considered emergency post-fire management priority. So there's no funds just to do that water quality monitoring from FEMA or CABW, so you have to figure that out ahead of time. And with that, I'll take any questions. Again, I want to thank our co-authors, my co-authors, funding from water boards. Thank you guys so much. I hope you have a good rest of your meeting.
Very good talk. Thank you. I got a couple of questions for you. Did you make any effort to determine whether the phosphorus loading came from the phos check that CAL FIRE Plains may have early sprayed?
So the question was if we had tried to determine the phosphorus that's coming in, if it's from just the land or if it's from the fire retardant that the CAL FIRE uses to suppress the fires. Yeah, so that's a big question. The public always asks me that. I actually called researchers, like maybe looking at stable isotopes or something, because I did not know, and it's really hard to determine from the lake or the stream, when you do a sample of phosphorus, you can't piece that out. Is it phosphorus that's coming from fire retardant? Is it coming from an ag fertilizer? Is it coming from the sediment? There's no way to piece that out. It's just from that sample. So that's a good question. You know, there's a talk in this session later that'll look more at impacts of just fire retardant on smaller systems, and he might have more information on that. That's Jamie. Oh, he says no, but that is a question. If there's any researchers that need I get that all the time from the public, and everybody asks that. And I think from our data, daily management and management of the land is at least to me right now, is the most important. So if you have everything is resilient and you're managing the best that you can for daily impacts, seasonal impacts, just the baseline storm event erosion, then you're more prepared if there's a fire, and those minimal inputs from the fire retardant are not going to have big impacts.
Thank you. One other quick question. What was your source book for your BMPs? For example, BLM uses a BEARCAT, which is a catalog of burn area emergency response BMPs. And Caltrans has its own BMPs. Of course, the USDA and NRCS has its conservation practice standards, which are BMPs.
So the question was, how did we identify where to put the best management practices on the landscape? What information was used to generate that?
What did you use exactly?
So it wasn't us at the county, but there's a post-fire response team, and the water boards has it. If you go onto there's a website, there's the Car Fire, the Camp Fire, and the Mendocino Complex, and they talk about on those websites what they use, but they do use the Bear Report. For us, it was the Forest Service Bear Report and the BLM Bear Report. They use information from USGS, the debris flow hazards maps. They use whatever they can that has been generated in that fire response, and then they actually go out and do, we went out with them, with the RCD, the contractors, we went out and actually walked the landscape and looked at areas and see if they matched up, which was with all the other information to identify, okay, this would be a good place to put this BMP. What type would go good here? And then mark it on a map. And we did that. We went out several times at many areas to identify that using all that information that exists.
So you didn't have a conflict, like NRCS would say, use this one, and
no, there was, we looked at there's very little conflict with all this because everybody's main goal was, let's get stuff on the landscape and let's prevent this erosion as soon as possible, and let's take everything that we have and let's make it work.